Welcome to another episode of Talking Positive with Randy and Alan. I'm Alan.
And I'm Randy.
And today's a very special show because this is our 10th show and our 10th episode. And because of that, we're going to talk, just Randy and I, without a guest, and explain to you why and how this all came about. So, Randy,
Alan?
How's it going?
Pretty good. It's exciting. You know, we made it 10 episodes.
I know.
Right?
Congratulations. Hey, 100 more coming. So 1,000 more, hopefully.
Yeah.
So let me tell you how this all came about. One day we were at an establishment, my friend Darren, Mark, and I, and we're sitting at the bar, and this gentleman walks in and sits next to Mark. And Mark looks at me and he says, "Alan, I think I know that guy. I said, "I don't know." Well, as only Mark can do, he swivels his chair around and he calls the guy up on his cell phone. And I see the guy reaching in his pocket and he picks up the phone and says, "Hey, how you doing?" And this guy is always jovial, I've learned. And Mark says, "How about meeting me over at where we were at the establishment?" And the guy starts laughing and he says, "Where are you?" And as he says, "Where are you?" Mark turns and he's face to face right next to him. So then, me being shy, as many of you know, I started talking to him, and it was Randy, by the way. And I started talking.
You forgot what made him notice why he thought it was me. You left that part out.
No, yeah, I said he thought it was you.
Because?
Oh, you want me to tell it? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, okay, it is. I didn't know if you want me to say that. He says, "I know that guy because he always wears nice shoes. So I said, oh, okay. So you know the story. Mark calls him up. And I said, and again, me being shy, I start talking with Randy. And I said, "It's a good thing you wore those shoes tonight." So we all started talking, Darren and myself and Randy and Mark. And I said to Randy, "What do you do?" And he tells me he makes movies, which he's in the process, and he'll tell you about that in a minute, of making another movie. And I explained to him that I had written a book, 3 years earlier, and I was trying to get it on voice into an audio book. I said, "Do you think you can help me?" And he said, Sure, I can help you." Well, people always say, "Yeah, I can help you," whatever. So the first thing I said, "Do you have a card?" "No, I don't have a card." So I give him my card, but knowing that I'm the one that wants this to happen, I take his number and write it down on another card of mine. A week later, I call him, and within 2 days, Randy had my book on audio.
And let me just, when it comes to business cards, I think I told you at the time, I don't typically carry business cards. And being back here in Michigan, I started to just get a few more just to have them. But being out in LA, the people that I'm around, the executives and studio heads and all, they don't have cards because they don't want everybody calling them anyway.
Right.
But if they just exchange the number, you'll remember them more, even with a handshake, and you get, personal, get personal with them, learn a thing or two, but get their number. That way it lasts a lot longer. And a lot of times people just take business cards and throw them away and pick their teeth with them or anything. Anyway. So that's why I didn't have.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Or they'll call you soliciting you for business or whatever.
Right. Or you win a meal at KFC or something
right.
that you didn't put your card in for. But
so we hit it off right away. And then I told Randy I had written a poem about my late wife, Andrea. And I said she had passed away almost 26 years ago. This was last year. And I said, "Do you know anyone that can turn it into a song?" And he said, Sure. And God bless Randy. Within a couple of days, he had it in the hands of a beautiful woman named Shelley Kay. And she took my poem and wrote a chorus to it. And then she turned it over to a gentleman named Jamal King Mellowman Clark. And he ended up singing it, and now I have a CD out called "Never Apart" of the poem I wrote about my late wife, Andrea. And that's how it all came about. And I said to Randy, "Hey, you ever interested in doing a podcast?" And he said, "Sure." And the idea of our podcast, the goal of our podcast is to talk to people that have had challenges because we all have challenges along the way, and how they overcome them with a PMA, with a positive mental attitude. And I'm thankful that Randy became my right-hand person in doing this, and I his right-hand person, because the chemistry is great and we're just enjoying ourselves. So Randy, now let you do some talking. I've done enough.
Thank you, Al. Yeah, this journey for me has been different, to say the least. And being able to meet you through our good friend Mark, which is crazy. Even when I met Mark for the first time, I met him at a Savvy Sliders in Troy, Michigan, at this event that I just happened to go to. And as you've seen with me, I love Polo Ralph Lauren, and I remember having on this pink polo sweatshirt and pink shorts to match. And Mark came over to me out of everybody there and shook my hand like, "Hey, how you doing?" I was like, "Hi, I'm Randy." He said, "No, you seem really good people. Your spirit, I can see you. You're a really good guy. Let's stay in touch." Now he really took to me that night, and that let me know what kind of person he was, right? And I've been around a lot of people who, especially in a position that he's in, that will act a certain way, act like they're better than everybody, act like you're not worthy to be in their space. And he never did that with me. Even from that first time that I met him, he was like that. I remember taking Kenny Crosley from Storage Wars out back to that same Savvy's later on when I was making another film. And a couple of his employees went crazy because they loved him. And he was always grateful and respectful for that. And I had Kenny taking pictures, and they took him back in the kitchen and showed him around. And it was a great thing. But Mark, God bless him, because he's a great spirit and great soul, and has been a great connector for you and I. So I'm very, very grateful for him and all that he's done.
And that's who Mark is. I've known him since he was 14 years old. And I like to say Mark's a character, but he's a good character.
Yeah.
And from 14, and he just turned 60, and he's still the same Mark that I've always known. So in that respect, yeah, we're blessed that Mark is, part of our lives and has brought us together. One of the things I wanted to talk about in this episode is you've been through some challenges, as
Sure.
have I. Do you want to share some of yours, and then I'll share some of mine? Too?
Yeah, I mean, the death of my mother, right? 2007, that was one of the hardest things I've ever had to deal with in my life. I never had to want for anything. And when she passed, obviously, my life changed. My whole outlook on life changed. And I was still working at Chrysler at the time, but that just showed me how short life is, right? And to not take 1 second for granted. So when she passed, I had nowhere to turn, no one to turn to. My father had passed, I think a year earlier, on Christmas, the day after Christmas, he had passed in 2006. So
Wow.
I had nowhere to turn, right? And I knew at that point, this is it, right? I had to face life on my own. So
Did it bring you and your siblings closer together?
I wouldn't say it brought us closer, but we've always been a close-knit family, right? We've always been a close-knit family. For me, I've always been a loner anyway, right?
Very outgoing loner, by the way.
Yeah, very outgoing loner. I was the youngest by years, by a decade, for my one brother, and he was shot and murdered. Wow. So the next gap was like a 20-year gap. So, with baby boomer versus Gen X, right?
So how old you and your brother were? A couple years apart, or
no, we were 10 years apart.
My brother, the next oldest,
yeah,
and he's the one you were the closest with at the time.
I wouldn't even say closest then, because the first group, they all grew up together,
right?
So by the time I came along, everybody was grown with kids and doing their thing. So it wasn't like I was running with them, right? My sister Denise, that we and her, we go dancing all the time now, right? I would say if any of them, she was always taking me around, because her kids were the same age as me, and she was always involved in so much community work and Boy Scouts, and she had nonprofits. So I was always under her, and she was very creative, and I'm a creative person. So
Right.
I always kind of looked at her, for her passion and skill
Right.
and the things that she was able to do with little to nothing, without having all the resources available. But she always was able to make something happen. So I kind of was up under her just because me and even her son, me and him, were even as my nephew, we were kind of like brothers growing up. So it was more like that than anything else.
Yeah. So tell you a little bit about me.
Mm-hmm.
For about in a 10-year period, I took care of my father, helped my mother-in-law with my father-in-law, my wife, and my mother, and I'll go into details with that. I've always had the roller coaster life, and at the age of 27, I woke up one day with a backache, and this is in 1987, and within a couple days, I couldn't move my left leg. Then I couldn't move my right leg, then my arms, and I was gone. And I had gone to Sinai Hospital, which is no longer in existence. Mm-hmm. I went to Sinai Hospital, and they were doing all kinds of tests, myograms, CAT scans, bone scans, whatever. And they thought it was in my lumbar area from my hyperactive reflexes. I went to the family doctor. He goes, "Have you always had hyperactive reflexes?" I don't know. So then he sent me to a physiatrist who is a physical medicine rehab doctor. And he just checked me out for 3 minutes and said, "Do you mind going in the hospital?" I said, "I don't mind, but I'm 27 years old. Can I ask why?" He said, "I did a few preliminary exams. I'd like to do a few more." My wife and I weren't even married 2 years at the time. So I went in there and I went into Sinai. And when I went into Sinai, this leg was gone. I literally would walk with this leg, pick up my other leg and walk. Mm-hmm. That's how I got to the admissions. So while I'm at Sinai, they were going to do all these tests. They did all these tests, and they were going to do what they call exploratory surgery. They were going to cut from the bottom of my back and look to see what's going on there. Well, there was a new machine out, relatively new machine, at Henry Ford Hospital downtown in Detroit, and it was called an NMR, nuclear magnetic resonance. Mm-hmm. And today we all know it as the MRI, exactly. And I went in to the MRI. They transferred me by ambulance. Mm-hmm. I went into the MRI, and the MRI found a 3-inch tumor or cyst the size of a breakfast sausage, as the doctor said, and I couldn't eat breakfast sausage for a long time after that. They found it pushing up against my spine, twisting my spinal cord, but it was in the thoracic area and the upper part. So had they done the exploratory surgery at Sinai, they would have got halfway up, said, "We don't see anything," sewed me back up. And as one of the other physiatrists said to me years later, "We thought you were going to be a quadriplegic."
Oh, wow.
So I thank God for that machine that, that A, found the tumor or cyst, and B, I thank him every day that I walk again. I could walk again. And I thought that would be the worst thing in my life. And that was back in 1987. And then in 1989, my father he had diabetes and he started having complications and he was ill and everything. And in 1993, my wife, Andrea, we were married total of 13 and a half years. So we got married in 85. So we're married 8 years, almost 8 years. And remember, I thought, being paralyzed was going to be the worst thing in my life. Was diagnosed with something called inflammatory breast cancer, the most lethal form of breast cancer. And she was basically given a year to live. But because she had that positive mental attitude and the great doctors behind her, she lived 5.5 years. But it was a tough 5.5 years. But you know what? We went to movies. We went on vacations. We lived life. And she even wrote a story called Fighting for Victory. And in it, she said, I can't worry about dying when I have to concentrate on living.
Mm.
So now we're in 1993, and she's diagnosed in February. And my father passes away in March, a month later. So while I was mourning my father, I was still focused on Andrea. Then a year later, her father passed away.
Mm.
And I would go to my mother-in-law's and father-in-law's house, help my mother-in-law with my father-in-law a little bit. And then I'd sleep over and then in the morning come back to be with Andrea.
Let me add and just jump in because I had to do that with my mother. All right. I remember driving home from Chrysler, like blinking and being 2 or 3 miles from where I to last remember being at. And I know how draining, how tiring that was for me. And I had to keep going. How was that for you? Like, were you tired or were you like, how were you mentally in that state? Because I was exhausted.
Well, I've always had that positive attitude. In front of Andrea, I was strong as could be.
Mm-hmm.
Behind the scenes, not very strong.
Yeah.
We had a marriage where we made a vow on May 4th, 1985, almost 40 years ago, that we would never go to bed mad at each other.
Mm-hmm.
And we said goodnight and I love you every single night of our marriage. And I'm proud of that fact. And even more so, she was the greatest. She had the best attitude. She just always looked forward to the next day. And even when she went in remission, there was always that fear that something might happen.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, when it came back a couple years later, it was more aggressive. And it was, I'd say the last 2.5 years was really tough. And I would call the doctors up when she wasn't around. I would go to my office. I'd be driving the car and cry. It's just human nature. I mean, my soulmate, my best friend, my partner. We didn't walk ahead of each other ever. We walked side by side. It got to the point where one time, and it was probably my fault when later on, when she was ill, we got into a little bickering match. And she walked out the side door to the garage, and she's going to pull away. She's going to go cool off. Rather than chase her, I walked out the front door and I laid across the driveway. And one of my friends said, boy, you're pretty brave here. She's pissed at you and you're laying across the driveway. And 2 seconds later, the whatever bickering was done and we were fine. So then after Andrea passed away in October of 1998, my mother got ill not even a year later. So remember, I lost my dad in 93, my father-in-law, who I was very close in 94, my wife in 98, and then boom, my mom's ill, and I ended up taking care of her. And as you said, and through it all, it just was how you just keep doing. You just keep moving. You keep moving. I had my mother here. And in fact, she was in my arms taking her last breath as the nurse's aide was washing her. Yeah. My cousin and I were holding her up. And all my friends said, how do you do it? You walk around with a smile all the time. You're always making jokes. You're always, I remember I walked into a friend of mine's office. He was an attorney, and I cracked a joke. He goes, how do you do it? He says, your father just passed away. Your wife's diagnosed with the most lethal form. Your father-in-law, and here you walk in, and you're cracking jokes. He goes, any one of those things can drive someone, up, down the wrong road or whatever. It's just who I am. So they kept asking me, how did you do it? How did you do it? Being paralyzed, going through everything. And so what I did, I wrote a book called Surviving with a Positive Attitude. And it's an autobiography. And it explains to people that no matter what adversity you have in life, and that's what I want our show to do, no matter what adversity you have in life, there's a positive in every situation. By the way, here's the CD that I wrote, Never Apart. That's my beautiful wife on there. And we just, and that's how I keep going and going.
Yeah.
And meeting you was a blessing from above. Yeah, also from Mark next to you. But it was a blessing from above because I found someone who has that same compassion, that same desire to help others. And that's why we're doing this show. And the
Absolutely.
feedback that we're getting from our first 9 episodes has been great.
Yep.
And
just the fact we're helping people,
exactly.
For me, that's always been a thing. Again, just growing up with my sister who had these nonprofits, who always drug us into them and made us as kids, whatever she needed. And whatever people, the grown-ups didn't do, the kids, she made sure we were there and pushed us out to do it. Even to the casinos in Detroit. I mean, we were the ones, she was the one that spearheaded the signature petition drive. And we were out there, I think we had just turned 18. This was when Greektown still had Trappers Alley and all that stuff. We were the ones out there with these petitions, getting everybody to sign and lining people up to fill out applications. So my sister has always been about helping. And for me, I believe that's just what rubbed off on even our mother. I don't just say my sister. It started with my mother. Always helping. I've seen my mother help all kind of people, even when people never returned the favor to her. So I think it comes from that, but I'm so glad that we are able to help so many people with this podcast. And I'm grateful that I met you, and I'm honored that you thought so much of me that you wanted to have this experience with me. And I think we make a great team, and I think we are touching a lot of people in ways that they never thought they would be able to share their story or be touched to want to share their story. So I thank you.
I thank you
for our friendship and our partnership.
I appreciate that. I just want to say that for those of you that saw me in the last 9 episodes, part of me is missing. I walked into the doctor's office on December 24th, 2024, and not knowing what was ahead of me. And I got on the scale and I said, no way. I'm going to lose 30 pounds by March 1st. And 2025. I mean, I had a goal. And so I ended up at that appointment finding out that I needed cervical neck surgery, which I had on February 10th. And by the time I went in that office on February 10th, or by the time I went in the hospital, I had already lost 22 pounds because I knew I wanted to, lose that weight. And now I'm down 40 pounds. So that's where the other 40 is. I'm going to keep it off. I wanted to lose 30, but I lost 40. I'm looking forward to recuperating from this surgery and maybe in a couple months be out there riding my bicycle and walking again, because that's what I love to do. In addition to helping people, you've got to help people. You got to be compassionate. And you know what? I see a lot of things that on social media that I really don't agree with. I try. One thing you will learn about our show: we are apolitical. This is about people. This is about positive mental attitude. This is about seeing who you could be with. Surround yourself with people with positive energy, with that positive attitude. And that's where we really mix. And one thing people ask both Randy and I, do you rehearse these questions when you're asking the people? Everything is spontaneous. So if you would like to be a guest on Talking Positive with Randy and Alan, call us at 313-454-1104 or email us at talkingpositivepod@gmail.com.
Yep.
Randy, I look forward to many years with you. Thank you, my friend. My brother.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
See you next time.